companies give gift cards, and those might be gas cards. You know, go to the gas station, use the card to fill up your tank. Cards that would allow you to go to a retail outlet and buy merchandise. Cards that would allow you to access a phone system, and I don't, the example that I have is like a prepaid phone card. Whether or not there could also be an equipment element to that phone card, I do not know. This example is just based on immediate experience, which is prepaid phone cards, essentially gas cards, and merchandise cards that would be usable in retail outlets. And so the question that comes up in conversation is 100% of the value of a gift card eligible? Because within that gift card, oftentimes, you know, if you go to the pump, you actually fill up your gas tank, and you would be including payment on profit for that gallon of gas. I just dated myself, but anyway, that liter of gas. You know, is there any guarantee, and this is where we often get to in terms of in-kind gifts, that the merchandise or the time on the phone telecommunication system or the liter of gas, is there a guarantee that that would otherwise be sold? And so perhaps profit should be included, because that's potentially revenue foregone and profit foregone by the giver or the company. Is there typically a default rate, meaning I give away 100 cards, and based on my research, only 50% of them are used? So automatically, I shouldn't be including the value of 100 of those cards, because year on year, the range that tend to be used are about 50%. Another question for consideration, and I apologize if you can see these all in front of you, that whole notion of guarantee otherwise sold, does it vary industry to industry? So is it possible to sort of have a universal response to how we manage the giving of a gift card, or does it need to be specific industry to industry? And then the whole notion would be, should the taxes actually be included as eligible? Because as an individual, I would pay tax on that good, which would decrease my ability to buy something that I could use, because I can't use the taxes. But the business who gets involved in taxable transactions generates tax, but also pays tax. So there's an accounting issue that actually could end up reducing the amount of tax that the company would pay over time. So, yeah. So, from a merchandising perspective, this issue came up just before Christmas, or in this recent audit cycle, and it was in a retail context. And some of they basically had done research on who uses their gift cards, and in their environment, they're typically used for electronics merchandise. And in this day and age, actually the profit margins on electronics are actually not that high. And so at the end of the day, based on how these gift cards were typically used, they did choose to discount the total value of their gift card giving by 3% as a starting point, knowing this conversation would end up happening, just to acknowledge the fact that it is possible that there would be some degree of profit margin in the merchandise that was being purchased with the gift card. However, 3% was chosen because the profit margins on this type of merchandise is actually very low. So, gift cards
I'm going to throw out a 50% because I still believe that there is a testing opportunity there too. So that should have some value. If somebody is a Rogers user and ends up, having a positive experience with TELUS, they potentially could change their viewpoint on that. So I'm just saying, is there no value to getting people to test your product?
Mm. And so it's possible, just to tease out what you're thinking a little bit more, it's possible that there just could be a universal amount applied, do you think? Or do you think it would vary industry to industry? Or a universal discount is a better question. Or should it vary industry to industry?
Well, unless there's a really low usership of those cards, I would think that 50% of it should be seen as being a marketing opportunity, and the other 50%, up to 50%, could be valued. And the only reason I say that is because in certain gift cards, we give out certain gift cards, but they have to set up an appointment. Well, our user rate probably the pickup rate on that might be as low as 2%. So obviously we wouldn't put that forward.
Isn't it based on cost? Because there's revenue we're getting. Like the 100% of the value isn't 100% of our cost.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why you would ever, if we were buying a gift card from, some other company, but if it's your own business, I don't see how you could do it on the value.
Mm-hmm. And so the thing which is so interesting about that, and I do know that the underlying principle is cost to company, right? So I think everyone's acknowledging that there is going to be a degree of profit in there, which will vary industry to industry. But if you said, okay, I'm a telecommunications company and I know that my profit margins are 30% on each card, that would be declaring competitive information that it's not possible for companies to share, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those contexts, typically what we would do is we would try to find some reasonable acknowledgement without going down the rabbit hole of getting people to acknowledge competitive information or anything along those lines, because we're really not trying to do that, cause that problem, if that makes any sense. What we're just really trying to do is to be clear on the value of the thing that we're giving and acknowledge that sometimes there's actually tangible value to the company that comes from engaging in community in this way.
But if the thing that I don't understand why, like I understand the proprietary issue, but if you said you only, part of the equation is the cost, like if we were, instead of gift cards, if we were giving away service, we can only we could only include what the cost of that is to us.
Okay.
And that's proprietary as well. And often what we have, we rarely do that because it is so complicated. But if in the cases where I've done it in, where there's significant gifts, there has to be like a third party evaluate that and say, yes, that's a legitimate, like to give the charity, that this is, they're evaluating the cost, the charity tax receipting.
Right. And so in some instances, the gift will be of such magnitude that
I get that. I'm not saying that, but it's still the principle that it has. It's based on. It's still based on cost. Like I would never think it would be 100% of the gift card. I could never imagine that scenario because that's never rarely the cost unless I'm purchasing it from someone else.
Right. And so some of the challenges that we have are companies are giving gift cards and they're claiming 100% of the cost. And so is it possible to make a recommendation that would say, okay, just generally speaking, we know it's not possible for all the reasons. And so generally speaking, we should just apply a percentage.
Well,
yeah.
But why don't you start with just what is the cost to them to give that away? What is it like? And then add in these other percentages. Well, is there a marketing, like your 10 questions or whatever, 6 questions, is there a marketing benefit you're receiving? And then, then you take off another 10% or 50% or like, I don't understand, even though if you look at the large group of how many cards you give away a year, you could easily answer, a series of questions to come up with a legitimate valuation. And they're submitting, I don't understand the proprietary because they're submitting that number in confidence to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what, like,
so
I don't get it.
Maybe what I should do is start with a different question, because I think this is really interesting. So my question to all of you is, do you think that these questions are worth asking the company? Are these fair questions when a company is reporting a gift card?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Does anybody disagree? Think that they're not fair-ish questions? Because Mary,
I just think if they're submitting this to you for audit.
Yep.
I mean, lots of situations you wouldn't ever, people wouldn't submit through to you for audit because they know that there's so many strings attached or whatever, that it's pretty well on marketing value. So if they're submitting to you for audit, then they need to provide you with details.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
I just would be really helpful to distinguish the two different scenarios of when the company is donating a card relating to its own products or services versus a company just buying gift cards from the marketplace and then donating it.
Okay.
Because when I read this, I automatically assumed, I just thought of the scenario, which is what we do, which is we just buy, a Starbucks card or something and donate that in at some event or something. And that's a very different scenario than the one that's, I think, being discussed here. And it would be important to distinguish.
Okay.
But a comment I have to that is I agree, but if you got a discount when you purchased that volume, you would just claim what your cost was, not the value to the recipient.
Yep. Okay. So I think right off the top, it's important to distinguish is this my company gift card or have I purchased it from somebody else? And if I have purchased it from somebody else, like Starbucks, then we need to declare the actual purchase price, particularly if that includes a discount or a bulk discount or something along those lines. So that's super helpful because I wasn't even thinking in that way. So that is a very helpful clarification. And actually, some of you may have already we have a tool that really helps companies to identify what the community investment, the community sponsorship value would be, meaning we have community investment as a contribution with no contractual business obligation. We have sponsorship, which is, of NASCAR or Formula One that has no community obligation typically. And we have something in the middle, which is a community sponsorship that is intended to benefit community, but there could be some commercially agreed, contractually outlined benefits that the company will receive in terms of profile or tickets or whatever it might be. And so we have a process that asks questions, and based on the answers to those questions, it influences whether or not the community sponsorship is 100% eligible or less. And so what I'm taking from this conversation is that we could probably figure out a similar type of process. It's not complicated. The community sponsorship one is 4 questions and it's, takes thought, but it's not an hour and a half. We could develop a similar process to see when it's a significant investment in gift cards, if there's a proportion that should be discounted. Does that make sense based on some of the questions that are here? I'll have to play with it a little bit, but then it becomes a routine. And it sounds to me like everyone is in agreement that this is a worthwhile conversation to have with a company that's giving gift cards from their own company. What I appreciate about the conversation is what our job is as SIMPACT, the LBG facilitator, is to implement what the companies think is important, if that makes any sense. So I'm really benefiting from this conversation because you're A, telling me you think it's important, B, asking for a process that could be consistently used, and underpinning that it would need to A, make sense, and B, be fairly straightforward to apply. So am I on the right track?
Yeah,
I think you are. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think
Okay.
anything to like that where we're all consistent is really part of our intention. And going
Perfect.
back to the, the same principles, whether it's what's the cost of the company and then all the other typical questions, I think that sounds good.
So what I'll do is we'll draft that out over the summer and we'll bring it back to be tested. So we'll report back. Okay.